Hello and welcome, Shield for Men here. So today I'm gonna do a deep dive into feminist networks and organizations that have ties to imperialist organizations or causes. Because many people still think that feminism is anti-imperialist, anti-war, and I will expose these myths once and for all. In my last video, I have already exposed a feminist organization called Women's Actions for New Directions, which was tied to the Atlantic Council. And now we will further expose many more feminist organizations that are acting globally. So, first organization that I want to show you is Women's Initiatives Supporting Group. This is the website. It says right here, the Women's Initiatives Supporting Group was founded on June 29, 2000 by 8 women with different professional backgrounds in order to support women's equal participation in various spheres of life and activities aimed at social change. So on this website you can see the partners and donors of this organization. And look at this partner and donor. National Endowment for Democracy, or short NED. Now, it says right here, the National Endowment for Democracy is a private, non-profit foundation dedicated to the growth and strengthening of democratic institutions around the world. But the National Endowment for Democracy is by many people called the second CIA, or like the sidekick of the CIA, engaged in push for regime change and other forms of imperialism. We will look at this right now. Here's an excellent video by the New Atlas, who does excellent work on imperialism, and he regularly exposes the National Endowment for Democracy on his channel. Now have a listen to this.
With democracy, as the illegal U.S. invasion of Iraq, codenamed Iraqi Freedom, had to do with actually bringing freedom to Iraq. And it's as easy as just going to the National Endowment for Democracy's own website under About and Who We Are and looking at their board of directors. These are not people who have dedicated their lives to advancing human rights and democracy around the globe. These are people who played direct roles in promoting and even executing illegal invasions like in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, the attempted overthrow of the Venezuelan government, and the ongoing conflict between the U.S. and Iran. And we'll just pick Elliot Abrams because he's the most explicit example of this. If you go to his profile here on the NED website, it says that he's on leave. He's on leave because U.S. President Donald Trump picked him to not only overthrow the government of Iran, but also to overthrow the government of Venezuela. And in this headline from the London Guardian, it says, U.S. diplomat convicted over Iran-Contra, appointed special envoy for Venezuela. And his goal is to promote this man named Juan Guaido, who the U.S. just picked and declared president of Venezuela. He wasn't elected. Nobody voted for him. They just declared him president of Venezuela. This is not democracy. This is foreign interference. This is U.S.-backed regime change in Venezuela. And if we look through the article and we try to see, like, what sort of association does Elliot Abrams have with human rights? And we come down to this paragraph right here. Abrams is widely remembered in Central America, but particularly from his time in the Reagan administration when he tried to whitewash a massacre of 1,000 men, women, and children by U.S.-funded death squads in El Salvador when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. Why would the NED have somebody like this on their board of directors if their mission was actually to promote democracy and defend human rights around the globe? Next, we have Ambassador Victoria Nuland. She's also on the board of directors. Her affiliation is Center for a New American Security. And if you go and you look at the list of the people who fund this organization, it's all weapon companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. It's also big banks like Citigroup, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs. It's also giant oil companies like ExxonMobil. These are not companies that come to mind when we think about advancing human rights and democracy. These are companies and organizations that come to mind when we think of those who abuse and suppress democracy and human rights the most around the globe.
Yeah, exactly. So, as you can see, the National Endowment for Democracy is an imperialist tool for US imperialism, and as we can see here, it funds feminist organizations like the Women's Initiative Supporting Group. This is very interesting. Next organization that is tied to imperialism is the International Women's Media Foundation. The International Women's Media Foundation, located in Washington, D.C., is an organization working internationally to elevate the status of women in the media. So, who is affiliated with this organization? Here is someone called Anne Lewandowski. Anne Lewandowski is the IWMF's development coordinator, supporting the organization's fundraising and strategic cultivation efforts. After spending a summer interning with the International Press Institute in Vienna, Anne grew passionate about global press freedom, advocacy, and journalist safety. This led her to move to DC and join the Center for International Media Assistance at the National Endowment for Democracy. So she's also tied to the National Endowment for Democracy. And as we have just learned, the National Endowment for Democracy is a US imperialist organization supporting regime change. And as you can see, also tied to feminist organizations like the International Women's Media Foundation. The National Endowment for Democracy funds many groups around the world. I won't go through this list, but when you go through this list, you will see they fund many different organizations, including many women's rights, feminist type organizations. But I just want to focus on one organization here. And this is the Sisterhood is Global Institute that they also fund. Sisterhood is Global Institute is an international non-governmental organization. For almost 3 decades, Sisterhood is Global Institute has been a consultant to the United Nations. Sisterhood is Global Institute was founded in 1984 by Robin Morgan and Simone de Beauvoir. A spin-off of Sisterhood is Global. Sisterhood is Global Institute was the first international feminist think tank. Now this organization has been a consultant to the United Nations. Now this actually is no wonder why the United Nations is so biased in favor of women's rights, but so biased against men's rights. And if we look at the founders of this organization, such as Robin Morgan, for example, we find that these people are radical feminists who hate men. Robin Morgan stated, quote, "I feel that man-hating is an honorable and viable political act, that the oppressed have a right to class hatred, against the class that is oppressing them, end quote. As you can see, clearly a man-hater, misandrist, just like every feminist is. And the second founder, Simone de Beauvoir. What is interesting about her is that in 1977, Beauvoir signed a petition seeking to completely remove the age of consent in France. And these are the kinds of people that found the first international feminist think tank that has been a consultant to the United Nations. That is very interesting, and like I showed before, they are also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. So we can establish a clear imperialist link between feminist organizations and US imperialism. Next organization, feminist organization that I want to show you is Planned Parenthood Federation of America. This is a organization that is that provides abortions in the United States and abroad. And what is very telling of this organization is in 2016, Planned Parenthood gave its first ever political endorsement to Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in her presidential campaign. With the endorsement, Hillary Clinton received $20 million or more in campaign funding. So not only did they endorse Hillary Clinton, but also massively funded her. And yet Hillary Clinton is a massive war hawk. It says here on the Saloon, even critics understate how catastrophically bad Hillary Clinton-led NATO bombing of Libya was. The New York Times reports on Clinton's war leadership don't go far enough. Hillary's disaster in Libya should haunt her. Exactly so. Hillary Clinton is a massive war hawk. And Planned Parenthood endorsed and funded her. The next organization, the next major feminist organization that I want to focus on is the National Organization for Women. It is the largest feminist organization in the United States with around 500,000 members. Now, the National Organization for Women also has some interesting things to say about it. For example, they contribute in funds massively to the Democratic Party, as you can see here. And the Democratic Party, on the other hand, is very hawkish on foreign policy, as Glenn Greenwald writes in The Intercept. As Democratic elites reunite with neocons, the party's voters are becoming far more militaristic and pro-war than Republicans. At the same time, Democratic policy elites in Washington are once again formally allying with neoconservatives, even to the point of creating joint foreign policy advocacy groups, a reunion that predated Trump. And the leading Democratic Party think tank, the Center for American Progress, donated $200,000 to the neoconservative American Enterprise Institute and has multi-level alliances with more warmongering institutions. By far the most influential liberal media outlet, MSNBC, is stuffed full of former Bush-Cheney officials, Secretary of State operatives and agents, while even the liberal stars are notably hawkish. A decade ago, long before she went as far down the pro-war and Cold Warrior rabbit hole that she now occupies, Rachel Maddow heralded herself as the national security liberal who was all about counterterrorism. So as you can see, the National Organization for Women has no problem with donating to war hawk Democrats. And what is also interesting about the National Organization for Women is that they are getting funded by also interesting foundations and organizations, like the Ford Foundation, for example. Now let's look at the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation was for much of its history the largest foundation in the United States, though it has been passed in recent years. So what is very interesting about the Ford Foundation is that it supported forced sterilization in India. Support for forced sterilization in India. According to the left-wing website Vox, Ford Foundation official Douglas Ensminger created large-scale sterilization programs in India, offering vasectomies to millions to halt population growth. In 1975, under the influence from the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi used emergency powers to appoint herself a virtual dictator of the country and declared a national emergency to implement a large-scale compulsory sterilization program, imprisoning dissenters. This event, now known as the emergency, was celebrated at the time by former president of the World Bank Robert McNamara. Quote, "At long last, India is moving to effectively address its population problems," end quote. And when we look at this event, the emergency, it becomes clear that this was also extremely anti-male and primarily focused on sterilizing men. So the campaign primarily involved getting males to undergo vasectomy. Quotas were set up that enthusiastic supporters and government officials worked hard to achieve. There were allegations of coercion of unwilling candidates too. In 1976 to 1977, the program led to 8.3 million sterilizations, most of them forced, up from 2.7 million the previous year. The bad publicity led many 1977 governments to stress that family planning is entirely voluntary. But it wasn't voluntary for these millions of Indian men. And like I said before, this was supported by the Ford Foundation, which also funded the National Organization for Women, a feminist organization. Here you can read more on Quartz. the legacy of India's quest to sterilize millions of men. Now, this is a very large article. I won't get into all of it. You can read it for yourself. But it is clear that this was promoted by imperialists who were working together with feminists. The campaign to sterilize men involved many levels of harassment, as Mohan Rao notes, in from population control to reproductive health, Malthusian arithmetic. Population control during the emergency was not just about compulsion. It was an experiment in integration in which every branch of government would take part. A new national policy, for example, froze the number of representatives each state was allotted in the Lok Sabha, India's lower parliamentary body, so that states would not have political incentive to grow their populations, and the government wasn't acting in isolation. US aid, the World Bank and UN were all pressuring Indian officials to incentivize sterilization. Very interesting, isn't it? And despite all this feminist imperialism going on in India, Indira Gandhi, under which this campaign happened, was in 1999 named Woman of the Millennium in an online poll organized by the BBC. So she was even seen as an icon, and still is by many feminists, seen as a feminist icon, as a strong woman. Meanwhile, she sterilized millions of men and was in cahoots with imperialist organizations. And what is going on now, or more recently in India, is that government wants to focus again on male sterilization. First to do so since emergency, even as the health ministry makes a fresh push to revive family planning measures. The Ministry of Women and Child Development wants a shift in focus from female sterilization to male sterilization. Now, this repeating of history is once again spearheaded by women's organizations like the Ministry of Women and Child Development. So this is very important to keep in mind, that this is an ongoing threat in India, this massive anti-male campaign. And as you may know, India is very anti-male in general, very feminist and very misandric in general. We will get into that maybe in another video, and others from the pro-male collective have already shown this. Now here is another feminist organization with questionable ties that I want to focus on. Global Fund for Women. The Global Fund for Women is a non-profit foundation funding women's human rights initiatives. It is a very massive organization, awarded over $100 million in grants to over 4,000 organizations supporting progressive women's rights in over 170 countries. And according to Ms. Magazine, it's one of the leading global feminist funds. Now let's actually look at the CEO of this group, Latanya Map Fred, President and CEO of Global Fund for Women. And it says right here, right on the website, she is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations, if you don't know, is an invitation-only think tank specializing in US foreign policy and international affairs. The organization was founded in 1921 by business and civic leaders on the belief that the US should embrace a leadership role and reject isolationism and support internationalism. So the US embracing a leadership role sounds very imperialist to me. And here's a great article summarizing the Council on Foreign Relations relationship with US imperialism. The Council on Foreign Relations, the high command plutocratic body promoting US imperialism, is the most powerful private organization, the central think tank of American monopoly finance capital. It is also a membership organization and the ultimate networking, socializing, agenda setting, strategic planning and consensus forming organization of the dominant sector of the US capitalist class. So, and this is the type of organization that is tied to Global Fund for Women via its CEO, Latanya Map Fred. Very fascinating connection here. Next we have actually the feminist position on Ukraine, which echoes similar imperialist themes. So you can see here a feminist website saying we stand with the people of Ukraine. And what is very telling here is this: sexual violence and war crimes in Russia-controlled areas. They're having this narrative that there was a massive sexual violence campaign in Ukraine by Russian forces. This is also echoed by another feminist organization called the European Women's Lobby. On their website they're saying protect women and children from sexual exploitation now and tomorrow. And it says right here in the article, atrocities carried out by the Russian Federation armed forces and now documented in Bucha, Irpin and other cities are a demonstration of use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Women and children, especially girls, are exposed to systematic sexual abuse. Now notice how there's actually no real evidence cited of this in the article itself. So this is just an empty claim. And what is very interesting here is the Ukraine official was actually fired over handling of Russian sexual assault claims. So Ukrainian official has been relieved of her duties over her handling of reports detailing sexual assault allegations made against Russians in Ukraine. On Tuesday, the Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine removed Lyudmila Denisova, the parliament's commissioner for human rights, from her post, according to Ukrainska Pravda. No new appointment has been made to fill the role. The move to dismiss Denisova came after outrage about the wording used in public reports about alleged sexual assaults committed by Russians, as well as the alleged dissemination in those reports of unverified information. Despite accusations from Ukraine, the Kremlin has repeatedly denied that Russian soldiers have committed war crimes of sexual assaults during the invasion. So as you can see, you have to actually be very careful if you make these types of allegations of sexual violence, and the Ukrainian government has a history during this war of some officials like this Commissioner for Human Rights to make claims based on unverified information. And this is echoed here in this feminist propaganda websites and organizations. So as you can see, imperialist, war hawkish, justifying lies being spread about Russia and Russian forces in the war in Ukraine. Next, we have this organization called Mama Cash. Mama Cash is the oldest international women's fund in the world, founded in the Netherlands in 1983. In 2013, Mama Cash supported 118 women's, girls and trans rights organizations with 4.3 million euros. And I mean, look at these massive sums of money, how powerful and wealthy they are. And they say we live in a patriarchy. That is laughable. Now, here's the website of this organization. And look at who funds them. The Gates Foundation committed grants to Mama Cash. Now, when we actually look at the Gates Foundation, also engaged in imperialism, for example, global health imperialism, powerful institutions of Western capital, notably the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, viewed the African Ebola outbreak of 2014 to 2015 as an opportunity to advance an ambitious global agenda, building on recent public health literature, proposing global health governance as the preferred model for international healthcare. Bill Gates publicly called for the creation of a worldwide militarized supranational authority capable of responding decisively to outbreaks of infectious disease, an authority governed by Western powers and targeting the underdeveloped world. So as you can see, this is basically hawkish style imperialism, where health issues are used as a pretext. And this organization funds also women's and feminist organizations, so another feminist imperialist link can be established. And the Gates Foundation, or Bill Gates, helps fund mass circumcision programs in Africa. Microsoft founder Bill Gates last week injected $50 million into a program to circumcise up to 650,000 men in Swaziland and Zambia. So as you can see, the circumcision campaigns are also funded by imperialists and capitalists, who are also funding feminists and who themselves advance feminist policies and anti-male policies. And we will also get back on the topic of circumcision in a minute, but I want to focus now on this organization, International Alliance of Women. It is an international non-governmental organization that works to promote women's rights and gender equality. Now, by gender equality, they of course mean female supremacy. They don't mean real equality. It was historically the main international organization that championed for women's suffrage. And now this International Alliance of Women has as its UN representative Soon Young Yeon, and Soon Young Yeon, who is a Korean American advocate for women's human rights, is also a board member of the International Advisory Council at the Harvard AIDS Initiative. Now here it gets very interesting. The Harvard AIDS Initiative has been at the forefront of HIV/AIDS research, education, and leadership. Now this is the website of the Harvard AIDS Initiative, and what they have been also promoting, of course, is, for example, male circumcision, again in Africa. Kathleen researched what factors influence the acceptance of male circumcision. Clinical trials, many done in sub-Saharan Africa, have demonstrated that circumcision reduces HIV infection risk by 50% to 60%. So on their website they promote the propaganda that circumcision reduces AIDS or HIV infection risks, which is completely debunked and nonsensical. I have demonstrated that these figures, 60%, are taken from the flawed randomized controlled trials done in Africa, which had numerous critiques. And again, you can look at my channel. You will find that I have taken apart this myth that circumcision supposedly reduces the risk of HIV infections. It doesn't. Circumcision has zero health benefits. So they promote circumcision propaganda on their website. And now it gets very telling. So Soon Young Yeon, who is affiliated with this organization and who's also affiliated with this massive feminist organizations that I showed earlier, praised the Harvard AIDS Initiative's Botswana-Harvard partnership. And this partnership was also promoted on the US Embassy in Botswana under this headline, "Infant Circumcision, a Giant Leap Towards an HIV-Free Generation." And all you need to read is actually this paragraph. The decision to adopt the new devices followed by a lengthy consultation process that focused on acceptability of infant male circumcision as part of HIV prevention and male reproductive health efforts that was conducted by the governments of Botswana and the United States through the Botswana-Harvard partnership in 2008. The results of the survey showed that 96% of mothers in Botswana would accept early infant circumcision for their babies. So this partnership, this Botswana-Harvard partnership, was actually focused on conducting and promoting male infant circumcision as a supposed HIV prevention effort. Now, this is really, really evil, because circumcision is a human rights violation. It has zero health benefits and harms children. And you will actually, when you look into this, you can also see this as a form of imperialism. So I will show you this article by Brian D. Earp et al. Campaigns to circumcise millions of boys and men to reduce HIV transmissions are being conducted throughout Eastern and Southern Africa, recommended by the World Health Organization and implemented by the United States government and Western NGOs. In the United States, proposals to mass circumcise African American men are long-standing and have historically relied on racist beliefs and stereotypes. The present campaigns were started in haste, without adequate contextual research, and the manner in which they have been carried out implies troubling assumptions about culture, health, and sexuality in Africa, as well as a failure to properly consider the economic determinants of HIV prevalence. This critical appraisal examines the history and politics of these circumcision campaigns while highlighting the relevance of race and colonialism. It argues that the circumcision solution to African HIV epidemics has more to do with cultural imperialism than with sound health policy. So, as you can see, circumcision in Africa has imperialist and racist connotations. And this Botswana-Harvard partnership, which pushes for male circumcision in Africa, has been praised by Soon Young Yon, who is also affiliated with an organization pushing for that, namely the Harvard AIDS Initiative, which again shows you that there is a clear link between feminist organizations like International Alliance of Women and imperialist, anti-male, and cruel cultural, colonialist and imperialist structures. And this is being promoted even though it has shown that circumcision permanently alters the brain. The surgery subjected the infant to significant trauma. A neurologist who saw the results postulated that the data indicated that circumcision affected most intensively the portions of the victim's brain associated with reasoning, perception, and emotions. Follow-up tests on the infant 1 day, 1 week, and 1 month after the surgery indicated that their child's brain never returned to its baseline configuration. In other words, the evidence generated by this research indicated that the brain of the circumcised infant was permanently changed by the surgery. Also, what I want to mention about the International Alliance of Women is that they have a participatory status with the Council of Europe. And the Council of Europe has been shown to have a very hawkish position when it comes to Russia and the war in Ukraine. The Council of Europe said Friday it is suspending all representatives of Russia from participation in the pan-European rights body over Moscow's attack against Ukraine. Permanent representatives of its 47 member states agreed to suspend the Russian Federation from its rights of representation in the Council of Europe. So as you can see, they have no intentions, or even since the beginning of since February, they had no intentions of having a diplomatic relationship with Russia, but went full force on confrontation and basically showed that they don't want to sit on a negotiation table with Russia, and are not really interested in peaceful solutions. And this is the organization that is aligned or connected to the International Alliance of Women, showing you again imperialist alliance with feminist organizations. Next we have this feminist organization called the Young Feminist Fund. And the Young Feminist Fund, again being funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't think I have to say much about that. Then we have the Women's Media Center. The Women's Media Center is a non-profit women's organization in the United States, founded in 2005 by writers and activists Jane Fonda, Robin Morgan, and Gloria Steinem. Now, as I have shown before, Robin Morgan also involved in the Sisterhood's Global Institute. And as I've shown in the last video, Gloria Steinem was a CIA operative. And on the board of directors, when we go to the website on the board of directors, we find Lauren Embray. Lauren Embray is the president and CEO of the Embray Family Foundation. The Embray Family Foundation is funding interesting organizations like Center for American Progress. They got almost $300,000 grant. And Center for American Progress has been shown to have close ties to the Democratic establishment in the United States. The president and chief executive of Center for American Progress is Patrick Gaspard, a former diplomat and labor leader who served most recently as the president of the Open Society Foundations. Gaspard succeeded Neera Tanden, who was appointed special advisor to President Joe Biden in May 2021. Tanden previously worked for the Obama and Clinton administrations and for Hillary Clinton's campaigns. I think this is all you need to know about this organization and its hawkish allies. And this is the type of organization that get funded by feminists. And then we have some people who might say that the organizations, the feminist organizations that I previously showed, were just capitalists and liberal or neoliberal organizations, and this is sort of explaining their imperialism. Well, for that purpose, I have also looked up a few feminist socialist organizations, like the Freedom Socialist Party, and this is what they had to say about Ukraine. So even though this organization has denounced NATO, it spouts NATO propaganda, actually, when you look at this quote from this article on their website. But the basic character of Zelensky's democratically elected administration is not fascist. So Zelensky's administration is not fascist, really. So this is a feminist socialist organization that says on its website that Zelensky's administration is not fascist. Wow. Now, again, under Zelensky, they banned men from leaving Ukraine during wartime. Men aged 18 to 60 have been banned from leaving the country. This is not fascist in the opinion of this feminist organization. Another thing, President Zelensky suspends 11 political parties in Ukraine over Kremlin quote-unquote collusion claims, including one led by the father of Putin's goddaughter. The Ukrainian government has outlawed 11 opposition parties with quote-unquote links to Russia, just banning parties that he doesn't like on just alleged claims of collusion. Incredible. And again, this guy is not fascist according to this feminist organization, Freedom Socialist Party. So they're downplaying Zelensky's fascism, or the Zelensky's administration's fascism. And here the most damning evidence of the fascism of the Ukrainian government. Reorganization and incorporated into the National Guard of Ukraine, November 2014, the Azov Battalion underwent a reorganization and was upgraded from a battalion to a regiment. And in 11th November, the regiment was officially enrolled into the National Guard of Ukraine. So they have integrated fascists, literal fascists, into the Ukrainian government. Wow. This is clear fascism. This is clear fascism. And this was not done away with under Zelensky, this state under Zelensky. So it shows you that this administration that Zelensky leads is fascist. But the Freedom Socialist Party denies this or downplays that. Incredible. and they're supposed to be anti-war. This is, and again, this is a joke, actually. This is a joke. Now here we have an affiliated organization with the Freedom Socialist Party called Radical Women. And they are also supposedly anti-war and anti-NATO and all of that, but they also spout NATO propaganda. The day after International Women's Day, Russia bombed a maternity and children's hospital in Mariupol. End quote. So on their website they're spouting allegations that Russia supposedly bombed a maternity and children's hospital in Mariupol. What all the Western media also says. But here we have eyewitness testimony about the Mariupol incident. Now let's listen to what she has to say.
Взрыв прогремел, мы вышли, нас эвакуировали в подвал. Мы потом начали обсуждать, был ли авианалет. Сказали, что авианалета не было. То есть подтвердилось наше мнение, что мы не слышали. Они тоже не слышали. Они сказали, что это прилетел снаряд. После того, как прозвучали эти два взрыва, тоже не было больше никаких взрывов. Мы посидели буквально там 5-10 минут. Продолжение не последовало. Пришли военные, сказали, что готовы эвакуировать. Я выходила последняя, потому что мне сказали, ничего зашивать не нужно, у тебя сейчас чуть-чуть пройдет кровь.
So as you can see, they actually didn't hear any airplane. This is actually very contradictory to the Western mainstream media that says that there was an airstrike hitting the maternity hospital. Again, the same pro-war propaganda that this feminist organization echoes. So this eyewitness testimony at least shows you that this allegation is on very shaky grounds. This anti-Russian allegation is on very shaky grounds, and yet it is fully echoed by feminist organizations like Radical Women, just like the anti-Russian allegations were echoed by other feminist organizations that had to do with supposed systematic sexual war crimes. So we see a clear pattern here that these even supposed socialist, feminist organizations that supposedly oppose NATO, even they are promoting imperialist allegations and have the same mainstream media consensus that US imperialists base their claims on. Now here we have another organization that supposedly, you can see already from the picture, supposedly is a anti-war organization. A Women's International League for Peace and Freedom is a non-profit, non-governmental organization working to bring together women of different political views and philosophical and religious backgrounds determined to study and make known the causes of war and work for a permanent peace. Well, I looked at this organization who is donating money to them or is government partners. So they even have government partners, which shows you how well connected these feminist organizations are, and how they network, and how powerful they are. So they are partnered with UN Women, but also with the Open Society Foundations. And when you go to the Open Society Foundations, is what the founder of this, or what the leader of this organization wrote about America's global role. At the invitation of the then Dean Paul Wolfowitz, I delivered a commencement address at the Paul H. Nitz School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. I spoke about my vision for a global open society, and Wolfowitz, now Deputy Secretary of Defense, seemed to be on the same wavelength. We had both participated in a small group called the Action Council for the Balkans, which was agitating for more muscular policy against Slobodan Milosevic. We advocated military intervention in Bosnia much sooner than it happened. I remember a lively exchange with Colin Powell when I questioned the Powell doctrine of we do deserts but we don't do mountains. I was very supportive of Madeleine Albright's activism on Kosovo, where I was in favor of a coalition of the willing NATO intervention without United Nations authorization, end quote. So this is what the founder of Open Society Foundations wrote, George Soros. He has shown in this opinion piece about America's global role that he's a massive war hawk, which is also evidence that he's not this left-winger that right-wing conspiracy nutters make him out to be. And this war hawk funds this organization, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Wow. So I don't know about you guys, but if you would have a supposed anti-war organization, but a massive war hawk would fund you, it seems very dubious to me. So, yeah, this supposed anti-war organization is controlled opposition. And also, what I want to show you is that NATO is very much in line with feminism. Like I showed in my last video, why NATO should adopt a feminist foreign policy is the opinion of the Atlantic Council. And even on the NATO website, they promote feminist propaganda. Women, peace and security. NATO recognizes the disproportionate impact that conflict has on women and girls. Even though wars are actually killing more men, but they are saying that conflict has disproportionate impact on women and girls. This is feminist propaganda promoted by NATO on their website. Wow. So, lastly, I want to focus on this women's organization, Association for Women's Rights and Development. The Association for Women's Rights and Development, formerly the Association for Women in Development, is an international feminist membership and movement support organization committed to achieving gender equality, sustainable development, and women's human rights. So yeah, typical buzzwords that don't mean anything. And again, they're receiving funding from UN Women and its predecessors, several government development agencies and development banks. the Open Society Foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Sigrid Rousing Trust, and other organizations. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't actually need to research anymore. This is very clear what this is. Imperialist Feminist Alliance. So, and I want to show you a contrast, right? So if we want to talk about anti-war, I just want to mention how men's rights organizations like the National Coalition for Men have actually tried to abolish the selective service on the grounds that it is sexist against men and unconstitutional. Now this unfortunately failed, but at least a men's rights organization tried something that was actual progressive and actual anti-war, because ending selective service would also mean just abolishing the selective the draft altogether, because most governments around the world don't draft women. So if we end selective service of men, male only draft, this would be a massive move for the anti-war movement. This would be a massive success for the anti-war movement. So men's rights and anti-war should be united. Alright? Because our societies are sending men into war and drafting them into the military and sending them as cannon fodder into war. And they can do that freely because men have been dehumanized in our society. There's less empathy for men than there is for women. And men's rights organizations and men's rights activists such as myself and such as the Pro-Male Collective want to do something about that. We want men to be recognized as human beings and not just as disposable cannon fodder. So this should be also in the interest of the anti-war movement to support men's rights. Because if men were seen more with empathy, then there would be more opposition to the male-only draft, and abolishing the male-only draft would be, like I said before, a massive success for the anti-war movement. It would lead to more peace, and that's what is in the interest of both men's rights and the anti-war movement. But it's clearly not in the interest of the feminist movement, and I will show you what I mean. So here we have a study, Subliminal Gender Stereotypes, Who Can Resist? We found that subliminal exposure to stereotypes versus counter-stereotypes led women who identify relatively strongly with feminists but less strongly with women to A. persist in a math test, B. show increased willingness to sacrifice men in a moral choice dilemma task. So identifying strongly with feminists in this study has correlated with a increased willingness to sacrifice men. It just shows you that it just further confirms that feminists hate men. They want to sacrifice men. They have an instinctive hatred against men. This is why I theorize that many feminists support imperialism, even though they pretend that they don't support imperialism, because sending men off to war and sacrificing them is in the interest of feminists who hate men. Alright? So this is basically the connection here. And anyone who wants to oppose what I've shown here, what evidence I've shown here, wants to say that these feminist organizations who are tied to imperialism are not real feminists. They're just committing the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? So this is bullshit notion that feminists are anti-war, anti-imperialist, as I have shown you that many major, powerful feminist organizations are in bed with imperialists, supporting or getting funded by imperialists. Alright? And even socialist feminists organizations push NATO anti-Russian propaganda. So yeah, I think I made very clear, I think that you cannot deny anymore that feminism is rife with imperialism. Okay? Nobody can deny this anymore. I've shown too much evidence of that. So yeah, this is all I wanted to say for this video.